Stop stalling and just tell us who's going to win the midterms, Silver.
Just get used to that between now and November, because that's going to be every question.
It's just June. I don't have to answer the question.
Hello, and welcome to the 538 Politics Podcast. My name is Jody Avirgan. The House is planning to vote on 2 Republican immigration bills this week, one more hardline and one more moderate. The votes are, of course, happening as the Trump administration's practice of separating parents and children detained at the border is exploding in a way into a political crisis. Of course, immigration played a huge role in Trump's dominance in the Republican primary in 2016 and his eventual presidential win, so we will use this moment to ask if hardline immigration stances will work for Republicans in 2018 the way it worked for Trump in 2016. Here to do that is Editor-in-Chief Nate Silver. Hello, Nate.
Hi, Jody.
Happy Monday.
Happy Monday.
Happy World Cup
World Cup Monday. Belgium just scored.
Yeah.
So we're letting you know. There's a little Easter egg if you want to know when we tape the podcast. Then.
Belgium just scored their first goal. That's right. Claire Malone is here, politics writer. Hello, Claire.
Hey, Jody.
And with us in studio, up from D.C., is Perry Bacon Jr., frequent guest, but not always in studio, so it's nice to have you here.
Good to be here, guys.
And Perry, lucky you, because in addition to talking immigration, you will get to join in on the next installment of our wildly popular series, Priors, where we get a little wonky and talk about how the midterms work from a political science perspective. Today we're going to talk about the connection between the economy and the midterms. And what's more, Perry, I can tell how excited you are. We have breaking news, because we're going to start with the fact that just about an hour ago, the Supreme Court weighed in on partisan gerrymandering. Luckily, we have someone on our team who knows a ton about partisan gerrymandering, producer Galen Druk, who did that multi-part series about it and has been writing about the Supreme Court case for the site as well. Galen, welcome. The moment is here. We have a ruling. Was it everything you anticipated and more?
Everything we anticipated and more. Not... Sorry.
Classic knots joke from Galen Druk there.
We didn't get much. They preserved the status quo, more or less. They did not touch the merits of the standards that the plaintiffs put before the Supreme Court in both the Maryland and Wisconsin cases. So essentially, they said, they gave a little advice. They said a few things that we can get into, but essentially they said, try again another day.
And it was mostly like a procedural ruling, right? Like, explain what standing is and how it kind of fit into this.
Yeah. So in the Wisconsin case, what you had was individual plaintiffs suing to throw out a statewide map. And essentially what the court said is that if you're going to sue based on vote dilution, you have to prove that your individual district has been, diluted, packed or cracked or whatever. And so the options there going forward are they could do that. Individual plaintiffs could sue based on their individual districts, or potentially something that I'm sure they will try. I don't know if it will work. They could get an organizational plaintiff. So like the Democratic Party would sue to try to get a statewide map thrown out. Then the Maryland case is really straightforward. Essentially, they said this district court has leeway in terms of granting a preliminary injunction, and the threshold is pretty high to grant that anyway. They never really had a ruling, right? Mm-hmm. Basically, the plaintiffs in that case asked for a preliminary injunction, forcing them to redraw the maps, basically, before they ever got a ruling. And so that was really not all that surprising in that case there.
Just as a question for Galen, do we assume that this is 4 liberals would have been for some kind of broad changes on this, 3 conservatives would have been against them, and then Robertson Kennedy are confused by this, and therefore is the assumption of most opinions what we should think about here too, that they wanted to avoid a ruling because Robertson Kennedy are not in a firm position here?
So here's what I will say. So in the opinion we got today, like 2 of the most conservative justices on the court, Gorsuch and Thomas, wanted to dismiss the case. The rest of the judges essentially said that this case can be remanded back to the lower court where they can argue district by district by district that those are illegal, right? So essentially what Roberts did was write an opinion that everybody else could kind of get on board with, but not make anybody happy. I think what the conservatives really want is to say that this is not justiciable. The Supreme Court will never rule to say that it is unconstitutional and force states to redraw their maps based on judicial decisions. And what liberals want is to say that, yes, there are cases where partisan gerrymandering is unconstitutional, and in those cases, we can throw out maps and force them to be redrawn. It's possible that this decision also means that Kennedy will be more inclined to stick around after this current session because it's debatable how much he genuinely cares about partisan gerrymandering versus how much reformers have kind of put that on him and said he does really care about partisan gerrymandering and he's going to be the one to kind of like join with the liberals and save them. But if he does want to be involved in ruling partisan gerrymandering unconstitutional, here's a reason for him to stick around, because it's likely that the Supreme Court will hear another case next term. And
in terms of those two paths that you laid out, you know, conservatives want this and liberals want this. Does one of those paths coming out of the details of this ruling feel like more viable, or is it really like back to square zero and both sides get to fight it out again all the way back up to the Supreme Court?
I mean, it really is back to square zero. You got a concurring opinion from Kagan giving some advice on basically how to move forward, but that's just her opinion, and Kennedy wasn't involved in that. And so ultimately, whatever ruling they get is going to have to be because Kennedy approves it, right? You basically have 4 people on one side who want to say that it's unconstitutional, and you have 4 people on one side who want to say that it's not justiciable. So it's really up to Kennedy, and because he didn't have much to say today, we don't really know where he...
Can you briefly explain this math theory that was used during the oral arguments and what the court said about it?
Well, they used in the Wisconsin case, they used the efficiency gap, which essentially is a form of partisan symmetry which measures wasted votes and can tell you if one party versus another party is wasting more votes. And, you know, in the oral arguments, the conservative justices were not particularly, impressed by
Roberts was pretty dismissive of it,
I think he called it sociological gobbledygook.
Right.
They were not that dismissive of it. I've heard some people say, oh, they crapped on the efficiency gap. They didn't really. Essentially, what they said is it's not applicable because it can only measure statewide outcomes. And so if individual plaintiffs cannot sue to disqualify statewide maps, then you just can't use the efficiency gap in this case. Okay. So potentially you could use it if you have an organizational plaintiff like the Democratic Party of Wisconsin or something like that. And then Kagan also said that you could potentially use it still to show, as some evidence to show that individuals have been disadvantaged in their districts. I'm not really sure how you would do that, but so they didn't talk that much about it.
What do you think happens if the Democrats win the midterms by 5 to 6 points, but they don't win the House because of sorting, gerrymandering, pick your word here? Do you think that changes the court's opinion? Do you think that it affects how politics is viewed in this way? How do you think that I know it may not happen, but I'm just curious if it does happen. Do you think that changes how maybe Kennedy sees this?
Outrage. I mean, that's obviously what the public's reaction will be. We have a case in Wisconsin where in 2012, Democrats won a majority, like a clear majority of the votes for state assembly and ended up in the minority, right? And so if the justices were going to be swayed based on that kind of a result alone, they could have already been swayed in the Wisconsin case, and they may still be. It's been remanded. They will continue arguing this case. I heard from one of the lawyers involved in the case this morning. And, he said, we're getting back to it. We're going to litigate district by district by district in Wisconsin. And again, I should say before we end, all eyes at this point are going to be on what happens to a North Carolina case. They probably will not have the same procedural issues that these two cases we saw had because, one, they have an organizational plaintiff.
That's the Democratic Party?
Yeah, the Democratic Party of North Carolina is involved in that lawsuit. So we'll see what happens if you can kind of get statewide maps thrown out if you have an organizational plaintiff.
All right, Galen Druk, thank you, as always, for helping explain this to us. And you're going to be writing about this for the site, so people should keep their eye out for that. All right, let's move on, and we'll talk about the story of the day, immigration, and how it may play into the fall. But first, let me tell you that this week's podcast is brought to you by SeatGeek. Buying tickets can be complicated and confusing, but there is a better way to buy with SeatGeek. SeatGeek is the smartest, easiest way to get tickets for every type of live event. Whether you're searching for a last-minute deal, planning a night out with friends, or need to find the perfect gift, SeatGeek helps you find the best seats at the best prices, fully guaranteed. There's nothing quite like being there in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value. SeatGeek is by far the easiest way to shop for tickets. You can be anywhere, and with just a few taps on your phone app, you can instantly find seats. It's designed to make your ticket buying experience easier than ever. SeatGeek saves you time and money by searching multiple ticket sites to compare prices and find that one amazing deal. And you get the most bang for your buck because SeatGeek grades every ticket based on value to help you immediately identify the best seats that fit your budget. Make SeatGeek your go-to app for finding the best deals on every type of ticket, from sports and concerts to comedy and theater. And best of all, you can get $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase right now when you download the SeatGeek app and enter the promo code 538 today. That's promo code 538, not spelled out, just the numbers, for $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. All right, let's talk about immigration, the role it played in 2016, the role it will play in this fall's elections, and the role it's playing right now with the stories resulting from the family separation policy along the border. This feels like a big moment. There's these photos of kids in cages. The Trump team is offering different, vigorous pushback. It's dominating the news cycle. So, Perry, I thought I'd start with you. I mean, is this a big political moment as you read it?
It is. It's one of those stories. It's a little like the travel ban early in the administration, where it's like dominated the news. It's on all the Sunday shows. Everyone's talking about it. It's all over Twitter. It's something real Americans are following. It's also, there's a poll out that showed, I think, 27% of Americans support this policy, although the probably Republicans support the policy. So it's one of those things.
46% of Republicans.
One of those things where Trump is on the wrong side of public opinion, but it's like Republicans maybe are sticking with him on this issue. So it is an issue where you can tell they're nervous about it, the administration, because they've given, like, Jeff Sessions, Nielsen, the Homeland Security Director, the President, and Stephen Miller have all given sort of different explanations for the policy, which tells you they're not all in line. At the same time, even Susan Collins will not sign on, the most moderate, or the most liberal Republican won't sign on to the Democratic bill to stop these separations from happening.
Are you surprised by that? The Collins thing in particular?
I am a little surprised, but I mean, on the one hand, we just saw the Mark Sanford election. I know Republicans are nervous about separating from Trump.
She sure is.
On the other hand, this is, I'll be honest with you, I was surprised by the poll. This is the rare issue. I've been looking for polls for this for about a week now, and I thought it'd be 10-90. So 27, 40, 56 is actually a little more support than I expected.
Claire, do you have any thoughts about why this is cresting in this way as an issue?
Right now, because the last 6 weeks have been when this policy has been enacted and when the separation of children has occurred, and there were a number of news organizations and public officials that were trying to gain access to these facilities. And I think it's just been, actually in my mind, it sort of goes back to the Syrian refugee crisis, which was happening for a long time, and then it just sort of caught on in the public eye when a young child drowned and washed ashore, and there were photos of him, and it really just sort of caught on in the public eye. To me, that's what's a bit of what is happening now. It's a convergence of media coverage and public officials kind of bringing up what's happening with this policy. And also there were some weird news stories that Trump actually himself sort of accelerated the media coverage around this. But I do think a lot of it is, frankly, like, people have gotten pictures of some of these detention centers, and it is striking to see kids in these facilities behind bars.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a reminder of the power of an image. We talk so much about the power of social media and all these other things, and then just a couple really heartbreaking images can just accelerate a story. Nate, did you see that poll? Did you have any reaction to it? I mean, I know it's just one poll. It's from Ipsos. I don't know what you know about Ipsos, but do you have a reaction? 27% of Americans approve of the family separation, and then 46%, which is the plurality of Republicans, approve.
Yeah, I thought I think it was the Daily Beast made a big deal out of this plurality of Republicans approving. I thought that was a pretty bad use of polling.
Their framing of it.
Yeah, I think if you're conducting a poll, then you should start with the top line results, and the top line results that the policy is unpopular. It's not 90-10 like Perry said, but it's 2-1 opposition, and support for Republicans is kind of lukewarm, right? I mean, look, we're in a partisan world, and so if, it's not that hard to get 27% in support of everything, but this is one of the more unpopular policies that the Trump administration has pursued. Maybe after 2 more weeks of debates on Fox and Friends, and, I don't always use this term, but what I think is essentially like kind of propaganda and deceitful, lying statements about the policy and what's being implemented and what isn't, then maybe they'll make it closer to the usual 40 in favor, 50 opposed, which is kind of where Trump's approval rating usually is. But for now, it's notably more unpopular than Trump is overall, and I think you clearly have a lot of Republicans who are Trump supporters who are uncomfortable with it. It's
funny. It seems like a big test of Trump's magical thinking kind of way of framing policies that he's done in the past, where he's framed up something, his words often, and sort of spun them differently going forward, and people kind of pick up on it in Fox News, and it becomes, the quote unquote truth, although not the actual truth. And to me, this is sort of a test of his ability to spin out the magical thinking and have partisans actually hold on to what he's saying and approve of it, because he knows it's unpopular and he's trying to foist it on the Democrats. And it seems, I think, to us clumsy, but I'm sort of interested to see whether or not it actually sticks, because it does seem like a little bit of pushing the bounds of how he can actually spin that truth and get people to buy into his version of it.
Perry, Nate laid out a scenario in which the popularity moves more towards traditional partisan lines. Is there a scenario in which this sense of moral outrage and these photos continue to come out and it moves in the other direction? It really becomes a 90-10 issue. Do we have 90-10 issues left in this country anymore?
Maybe we don't, because I'll be honest with you. I doubt this, because I guess the thing...
No one likes airlines.
Airlines might be it, but in terms of this policy, I thought kids is the one thing that I think is different than refugees or different than DACA recipients or tend to be, sometimes are older. But I thought young children is the hardest part of this policy, I think. My guess is, I think we're seeing some signs. I'll be curious to see. Laura Bush had this very strong op-ed attacking this policy. I'll be curious if other Republicans start attacking this policy too, and eventually the Republican Party gets to the point where they change the policy itself, and then it'll become more unpopular because at some point maybe Trump in some ways changes the policy.
Lindsey Graham said something. Yeah. I mean, Paul Ryan kind of walked a weird line that was sort of in line with the Trump administration's thing that said, oh, it's a court ruling. It's not us. We can't change the policy. But there are obviously people who I would say are probably pretty uncomfortable with this, again, behind closed doors, but they're sort of hewing to the weird line that the Trump administration has put out here.
Well, yeah, I don't know what line that is exactly. Right. I mean, the other thing is if you have to lie about a policy to say either you're not doing it or it's a Democrat policy or it's okay, they switch back and forth between these three totally incompatible rationales, and that probably doesn't really do that much to rally your
Well, is that a sign
supporters.
that potentially they're reading it as, oh, this isn't breaking our way? And I mean, there is a sense of the administration scrambling to find the right line.
Oh, yeah. They know the policy's not popular. That's why, that's why Trump is saying it's a Democratic policy, which is absurd, of course, but they know it's not a popular policy. At the same time, it is their policy.
Sessions is sort of,
I was going to say that,
full-throatedly sort of saying, This is what it's intended
policy.
To do.
Right.
This is what Stephen Miller and I intended to do, it to be a deterrent. And then you've got the DHS secretary sort of walking the more legalistic line, I guess.
The Trump administration wants to reduce the number of immigrants coming to the country, and they've taken unpopular steps. Ending DACA was actually fairly unpopular, so they're okay with taking unpopular steps. I think we're now seeing what is the extent of a policy they'll take, because the goal here is, from Sessions and Miller, is to deter immigrants from coming by being pretty harsh. And I think we're seeing I'll be curious if they can sustain even this policy.
Yeah. So this is a perfect segue, to connect it, as we want to do in this conversation, to the larger questions about immigration policy, looking back, but then also about projecting into the midterm. So I don't know, Claire, Perry, let's reframe in 2016 kind of the role that immigration played in Trump's victory, both in the primary and in the general. And then if we see a through line to this particular moment and this particular, political explosion around this border separation.
Immigration was, frankly, a dog whistle issue during the 2016 election. It was the way that Trump, found to play on people's racial worries, especially following or during an Obama presidency, obviously the first black president. So, the Muslim ban and, build that wall were ways to frame racial resentments that have existed for a really long time in the country. And Trump did a quote unquote better job than other fringier candidates like Pat Buchanan, or if you're reaching way back, George Wallace, to kind of mainstream it and make it a powerful force in the election. And I do think the fact that he did it coming on the heels of Obama's presidency made it more powerful. But that's what I would, there's obviously been sort of valid immigration debate throughout the Obama administration. And we should say that the unaccompanied minor policy controversy over it did start during the Obama administration. But I would say Trump's core ethos on immigration was, I think, at the heart of it, a racial one, but a powerful message to a particular base in the Republican Party and some Democrats.
I hated that phrase seriously, but not literally. But the people I met at Trump rallies, I don't think actually wanted to have thought, oh, we're going to have a Muslim ban. Oh, we're going to stop DACA. I don't think they really necessarily were voting for. They liked the idea that Trump was sort of speaking for them. He was not cheering on multiculturalism and more people speaking Spanish and more same-sex weddings. So they liked that. I'm not sure they were necessarily voting to have children who, mothers breastfeeding, taken, have
it was more of an expression of identity.
Yeah. And so I wonder, I don't think voters voted for Stephen Millerism. I think they voted for like rhetoric and a policy, rhetoric and approach and not Obama. I'm not sure voters were necessarily that interested in this immigration approach as such, and I think Trump will be fine. Forget the Ann Coulters. I think the average Trump voter will be fine with some anti-immigrant rhetoric, but not all of this policy.
Immigration's a strange issue. We talked about it before, where if you kind of survey people about here's a proposed policy change, what do you think? Then if you look at that in a kind of literal way, then people are quite pro-immigration, they're pro-path to citizenship, they're anti, obviously, this detention policy in Texas. But, maybe there is, number one, maybe there's more passion on the anti-side, certainly in the Republican primary. But number two, I think this is consistent with what Claire and Perry are saying, but it is like a dog whistle or like a proxy for a lot of other stuff, right? I would support the argument that stoking racial anxiety was a important part of Trump's victory more than I would support a claim that immigration policy per se was an important part of Trump's victory.
But there was also, just Perry, to your point, there was an element of punitiveness in Trump's rhetoric. We talked about it a lot, a sort of dark edge there that I think is what we're seeing reflected in a lot of this. And so, yes, when you see, when you're confronted with the actual images, perhaps some Trump voters, but I don't want to diminish the we're going to get back at people for breaking the law, or that kind of punitive element was a powerful force in Trump's campaign and rhetoric.
And I was doing some story today, and the data shows that Trump's Republicans overall, even in 2012, wanted to see lower immigration levels in the country. So that's an important, about 80% wanted to see lower immigration levels, and that's much higher than the Democratic number, and has sort of stayed high on the Republican side and went down. Democrats generally are not opposed to immigration levels staying pretty high. So I think that's true. That yes, the Trump voter is not necessarily excited about the sort of growing multiculturalism of the country. That's true. I'm still not sure that they want this level of intensity of immigration enforcement.
Yeah, it's funny, since 2016, everyone kind of gets prickly as a porcupine on both sides about immigration policy. But if you look back to 2012 and 2008 and Democrats' immigration policies back then, they were a bit more what we would call now centrist about, okay, we understand that you want to control illegal immigration, see the unaccompanied minor policy during the Obama administration. But you had someone like Mitt Romney who in 2012 coined the famous phrase self-deportation. And by the way, in his Senate race in Utah, continues to take a hard line on immigration, which I think some people were surprised by in this Trump age, and Romney is sort of this anti-Trump figure. But Mitt Romney really believes that stuff as a core principle of what his policies and politics are. And not so long ago, there was more sort of just wonkier policy debate about, okay, what should the levels be? What are the actual policies? And now all of that stuff has kind of been set aside for the more blunt force argument of, are you a racist or are you not a racist? That's kind of what our immigration policy has come down to be, or the rhetoric surrounding it.
And we talk a lot about the shift in the Republican Party, but there are some pretty striking numbers on Democrats as well. In the mid-90s, Democrats and Republicans both kind of felt like immigrants were more of a burden than a strength for this country. And then since then, 84% of Democrats now say that it's a strength. And so the shift within the Democratic Party is really interesting too. Obviously, we're focusing on the Republican Party because of Trump's ability to rally that issue and win the presidency. So I guess let's come around, Nate, to the central question here, which is looking forward to 2018. Can Republicans in this upcoming midterm use immigration as successfully as Trump was able to use it in 2016?
Again, I would dispute the premise. I'm not sure I agree that Trump was able to use it. I mean, to really, really back up here, people act as though Trump winning the election in 2016 requires some extraordinary explanation. And it doesn't really. Each party wins elections about half the time. He was really unpopular, but so was his opponent for lots of reasons. He happened to have a coalition that played well in the Electoral College. He lost the popular vote. You know, the polls ebbed back and forth, and like the last thing in the news cycle was an unfavorable story for Hillary Clinton. I mean, it's, you know, and
but this question of immigration was a huge split for Trump. I mean, he was wildly more popular than Hillary Clinton for voters who prioritized immigration. I guess you're saying
it's
what
like
does immigration
circular
mean?
logic, though, right? It's like not like, you know, because that also forces voters to pick one issue, right? And so, yeah, I mean, but, you know, I think it's like putting the effect before the
I see what you're
cause, right?
Can I say you would agree that Trump won the primary?
The primary was important, for sure.
Yeah. So let's look at that phenomenon as something that is still a phenomenon within the GOP. Is it at all a force going into this fall? I mean, it's a midterm. It's obviously Trump's not in it. These are statewide elections, federal elections at the state, you know.
I mean, I think it has the potential to divide what we used to call the establishment Republicans from the Trumpian Republicans, and particularly an issue like this, where the establishment is clearly very uncomfortable with this border policy. I mean, that's, you know, if you had to pick a single issue that would kind of cause potential grievance and danger to the GOP coalition, immigration in general would be it, but this policy in particular would be it too. And so, you know, I don't look at this as like some brilliant Machiavellian electoral strategy to motivate his base to say this is an issue where Trump's probably getting bad advice from Stephen Miller's of the world in terms of the politics of it, and that the best thing Trump could do would be to go out and give a press conference the minute after you listen to this press conference and say, we are revising the policy, right, and we will work with Democrats to make sure we get a policy that has strong border security, plus et cetera, et cetera.
I agree with that. This policy particularly is a political disaster. I do think overall, though, you're seeing a lot of ads from Republicans in races. I guess we start with the Republican primaries. Like in Georgia, there's a runoff right now between the lieutenant governor and I want to say the secretary of state for the Republican nomination for governor in Georgia. They're basically having a race to the right over who can be most opposed to sanctuary cities and so on. So I do think within the Republican Party, you're going to have fewer Bob Corkers and Jeff Flakes and John McCain's who are pretty left or on immigration in the future. I think the party is moving. Trump has reshaped the party in primaries, I think, on immigration. But I don't think it's going to help that much in the general election. I don't think it's going to help. Yeah, I think if you're in a swing district, I'd be curious to see what like Barbara Comstock or something like that is talking about on this issue. But I don't think she's like, yes, this is a great policy. My guess is she's trying to duck reporters right now.
Yeah, I mean, we're going through the primary season, and primary political ads are coming out, and like, you know, groups want to get their spending done. Dark money groups want to get their spending done before September when they actually have to report who their donors are. So they're getting all those big like pro-Trump immigration policies out there now during the summer. And then I do think it'll be interesting to watch like the media buys and the ads come Labor Day, let's say, and how they change basically, and whether or not people kind of like smooth out the very primary voter hinged messages of Trump immigration policies.
This family separation issue, these photos that we're seeing, the way that it's really dialed up the emotion on both sides, is that something that we think will continue? I mean, has the die kind of been cast as this is going to be a big issue, or is there a chance that we get to September and we say like, oh, remember that week where this was a big thing and I think
people will remember this. Yeah. Yes. And it seems to me that it's going to be a thing that not just people will remember it, but I think it's going to be a thing that news organizations continue to follow as a story, in part just because it is like it's a thread for people to investigate or devote resources to. It's the kind of story that I see like assignment editors as being like, yeah, we're going to keep on this immigration story.
Like if you're a TV network, the Mueller story is kind of hard to cover. Yeah. It's complicated. It's slow moving. Mueller never speaks in public versus this story has images. I think some of the anchors have gone down there. So I think the story is going to last for a while. And I think if the Democrats win the House, we'll look back at these kinds of stories as being, healthcare was a big galvanizing event in 2017 for Democrats. And I think this kind of event will be galvanized in the sense that this sort of makes that base of kind of, so you had last summer people going to these rallies with the healthcare bill to oppose it. And you had all these liberals and, suburban moms and so on. I think this becomes that issue for this summer. Is like, this is the one thing that people are really on the left are really angry about in a way they couldn't get angry about the tax bill for.
And frankly, maybe suburban Republican women.
Yeah. Yes, that's a good point.
Yeah. Like this is not
this is not just a partisan issue. That's right.
Yeah. So maybe Nate, you can jump in on that, which is kind of where we started. Like if we're trying to make a list of the big moments, I know we're still in this moment, but firing Comey, the travel ban, the healthcare debacle. I mean, does this rank in that sort of small group of Trump touchstone moments that galvanize the two sides?
I mean, to me, it forms an interesting compare and contrast with the travel ban, and I think it's a bigger deal than the travel ban, although I might also say the travel ban was a little overrated given how momentous many Trump things are. But this seems to me, like Perry said, because of the imagery, because it involves children, right? Because sort of unlike the travel ban where they were, I guess, defending it, I mean, they seem so, the responses coming from the White House and their allies are so incoherent and inconsistent and kind of blatantly deceptive and deceitful in some ways. I mean, kind of the optics around it are all, I hate that term, but this is a case where this is the type of issue where if Trump understands the power of imagery, and Perry's right too, that it's the summer, it's getting to be a little bit slow, Congress isn't going to do very much except with respect to immigration anyway. So you would think the story would have 2 or 3 weeks in the spotlight. Again, with that said, it does seem to me like Trump might have an out just by reversing the policy,
which he can do, to be clear,
can do.
Yeah. So I guess we should mention that too, Perry, that there are some bills in the House this week. Can you talk about the sort of two paths and whether you see a path for either of them, as a viable bill?
So the sort of thing we should context here is that there was this whole push by the moderates in the Republican Party to have this discharge petition to force a kind of a DACA bill that was basically DACA, nothing else. Kind of, in other words, they'd have a vote where basically the Republican moderates and the Democrats would join together and pass something. They didn't get enough votes for it, so they didn't move that along. So now you have two bills, one of which is like the Goodlatte bill, which is like a Stephen Miller written bill, essentially. It's very conservative. We're not sure it'll get even 200 votes in the House. We assume some Republicans and every Democrat will vote against it. The second bill is kind of an amalgamation where it's going to have a DACA provision in there. It'll have the border wall in there. It'll have some policy that's designed to stop these separations on the border. The Democrats say they can stop already without this bill passing. It's going to have some limits on legal immigration. So it's a compromise bill, but has a lot of things in it. I'm not sure it'll pass or not in the House. No Democrat will vote for it, is my guess. It won't pass the Senate either way. And so in that sense, it's more just like if they can pass this bill, they'll be able to say, I think, we tried to address this issue in some way. And I think that's the context for this week. But I think neither bill is likely to get much further than the House.
And so ultimately, just to put a fine point on it, ultimately a change to the actual policy about what's happening at the border will have to come from Trump.
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay, let's leave it there. We will obviously be watching the story as it develops. But up next is the next installment of our Priors series, where we're going to talk about the connection between the economy and the midterms. But first, let me tell you that this week's podcast is brought to you by Casper. The idea of falling into bed at night takes on a whole new meaning with a Casper mattress. The engineers at Casper have really outdone themselves in creating the most exceptionally comfortable sleep experience ever. Who doesn't want an exceptional sleep experience? When you get one, you'll totally understand why it is the internet's favorite mattress. Casper has created 3 unique mattresses that will help you sleep cool and comfortable year-round, but in particular, you want to be cool at night heading into this summer. The Wave mattress has remarkable technology built into it and is engineered to relieve pressure points at 36 different points. The Casper mattress is more breathable and comfortable than ever and loved by nearly 1 million happy customers, many of whom might be asleep at this moment. And the Essential mattress is innovation at a great price point. All Casper mattresses are designed with zoned support to coddle and comfort your every move, and they all provide the perfect support for any position that you sleep in. See for yourself why Casper has hundreds of thousands of happy customers. Try your Casper mattress for 100 nights in your own home for free with free shipping and returns. Go to Casper.com/politics and use the code politics to save $50 off the purchase of select mattresses. That's Casper.com/politics. Use the code politics Terms and conditions apply. See site for details. This week's podcast is also brought to you by Stitch Fix. Style. Some people have it, some don't. Particularly heading into the summer, it can be really hard to maintain that style. But just because you don't have a sense of style doesn't mean it's not possible to attain. There's no time like the present to discover that style you never knew you had, and you can with a little help from Stitch Fix. Stitch Fix has reinvented how we find and buy clothes. You just answer some basic questions about your size, your favorite style, and budget right from your laptop, smartphone, or tablet. Then your personal stylist springs into action, hand-selecting 5 brand new clothing items just for you. Personal stylist may sound like something only the rich and famous can afford, or it may sound a little bit too much, but no, it's the perfect way to find those perfect items, and it's perfect for you. Stitch Fix's styling fee is only $20, which is applied as a credit towards anything you keep. And since your personal stylist uses only your preferences to pick your clothes, you are still in complete control. You're not going to get any major surprises. You're just going to get a little bit of help. Once your items arrive, you can try them on, and you only pay for what you keep. Get your fix whenever you want, or sign up to receive scheduled shipments. The choice is yours. Hurry to stitchfix.com/politics to get started now. Keep all 5 items in your first box, and you'll get 25% off your first purchase. That's stitchfix.com/politics. One more time, stitchfix.com/politics. All right, we're back, and we are continuing this series of conversations we kicked off a few weeks ago. We are calling it Priors. In this series, we're kind of taking a step back and using political science, history, a little bit of data to look at how the midterms work. Last time we talked about partisanship, and this week we're going to talk about the economy and how it affects midterm outcomes. So, Nate, what is your starting point when you think about how much influence the economy has on elections?
I think it has more than, like, the average layperson assumes, and probably less than, like, maybe the stereotype of what a political scientist would say. Look, in presidential elections, the economy, I mean, you get into issues here. One is, how do you measure the economy? And there are a lot of different ways to do it, potentially. In my view, the economy explains maybe a third, 35%, somewhere around there, of like why general elections unfold as they do. I think some people would say more, and this gets into rather technical territory about how models are designed, and because there's so many different economic indicators, you can cherry pick indicators over small samples. So there's some p-hacking / overfitting issues here. But clearly, it's like a big home field advantage in essence, where like if the economy is good, then the incumbent party tends to do well. If the economy is poor, the challenging party tends to do well.
And does that hold up in midterms as well?
Not that well, no.
Huh.
Not really.
Why is that?
Well, there are a lot of answers. One could be that, like, midterm elections are, first of all, midterm elections tend to be balancing elections. And so, kind of whatever happened in the previous election, you tend to pull back from that a little bit and say, okay, let's kind of give the opposition party a bit more power. That's what happens most of the time. Secondly, like, maybe the public gives less responsibility to Congress for the economy than the president, although you could argue that, like, it should be the other way around, Thirdly, midterm elections, at least some of them, occur only 2 years into a president's term, and therefore maybe whatever credit or blame there is to dole out in the economy, 2 years is too early to do that. I mean, there is some relationship depending on what variable you look at, and so I do think that, like, if you were listing reasons why Republicans might hold the House this year, the economy is definitely among the first reasons that you would mention. That's definitely like the very solid numbers, and this is not a case where, like, oh, some indicators are good, some are bad. Pretty solidly across the board, economic indicators have been pretty good over the past year or two under the Trump administration. Therefore, that helps them, but it's not, I would say it's not a be-all, end-all in presidential years, and it's definitely not in midterm years, but at the same time, that's one of the best arguments Trump can make is to say, look at the unemployment rate, look how low it is, look how many jobs we're creating. I'm a competent president, I'm doing what I promised. So it is, it's very helpful to him.
Where do we go from there? What a thorough answer.
So I remember, like, when I think about this, I think of the first midterm I really covered was 2006. The economy was pretty good, but there were a whole lot of other factors that, resulted in balancing, which is what the phrase Nate used. And I think this, I did a piece a few weeks ago. I guess one of my great questions will be, imagine a president who did not send weird tweets, lie a lot, or do other odd or take children, parents from the children of the parents of the border, who also had this economy. Like, maybe Jeb Bush or Marco Rubio is at 52% right now, and the midterms I think do look differently then.
What was your face?
So I think Jeb or somebody who's just a more traditional Republican who's not behaving this way with this economy might be doing really well.
Yeah. And so, I mean, in a weird way, this fall is going to be a really interesting political science, like pitting some fundamentals against each other, or like a little interesting petri
or
dish
not really,
or
maybe totally abnormal. Well, I guess it'll be an indicator of how overriding some of these fundamentals are when we have a totally abnormal test case. But
you mean Nate saying that midterms are basically, to take liberties with his words, sort of like the dumb election, where it's more just like, where I'm going to vote for the opposite of what we have now.
That didn't work out so well. Let's give you up.
I will say, the more that I host this podcast, the more we, I think, collectively think about this stuff, the more we revert to just kind of like, maybe the American electorate just goes in this direction, and then 2 years later they go in this direction, and then 2 years later they go in that direction.
Some evidence for that.
But we'll keep the mystique of Nate's model going, and then eventually we'll realize it's just, I'm going to do the opposite way.
But that's not, I mean, to intellectualize the point that you just made, that's actually not, I just call them midterms dumb elections, but also that's not an irrational way to vote at all, to say like, well, you're not doing well, so I'm firing you.
Yeah.
That's not a crazy thing.
And I think it ties back actually to the immigration conversation we were having, which is where it's easier to run against something, and then all of a sudden when it's happening under your watch, you own it, and that cuts both ways. And so the good economy now. So let me ask this, which is, does the good economy now feel like Trump's economy? Will voters see it as Trump's economy?
There's some polling that I think it was Quinnipiac, and I probably should have checked before I came on here, that showed that now the plurality of voters think the majority of voters think the economy is good, and the plurality of voters now give Trump, not Obama, credit for that. Mm-hmm. That's useful. I do wonder if this one becomes an issue where Republicans were going to vote for the Republican candidate in congressional races anyway, and I do wonder if it becomes like, oh, Trump is good on the economy in North Korea, so I can vote for Republicans because of that. But I was going to vote for the Republicans anyway. That's kind of what I think. My question might be for Nate: do issues matter in midterms? Period.
Yeah.
Like, will healthcare matter? Do you think Iraq mattered in 2006? Do you think healthcare mattered in 2010?
Sure.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah.
But where do you put this question of issues and then the economy within that list of issues, in terms of having an impact? Are there other things that scale to the level of the economy consistently?
I mean, the economy is easy to put into one bucket, right? Wars.
Right.
Or major domestic policy initiatives, if you put them in a bucket, probably matter the same amount or whatever, or more, right? I mean, look, it all filters through the president's approval rating, and the president's approval rating probably matters, and the generic ballots. It gets a little circular, right? Like we had this debate internally, like kind of what is a prior, what's a fundamental, you know what I mean?
It's a fun office.
Yeah. This is what we do. Occasionally we order food before we do this.
What's a fundamental, what's a prior, I like that, yeah.
I mean, look, I guess one question is like, is the fact that the economy is pretty good, is that a reason to predict that Republicans will do better now than they are in the polls? And I think the answer is probably not. I think it tends to be reflected in the polls and all the things that give Trump his 42 or whatever it is % approval rating that include the mix of bad things. I think it probably would be the case that, like, if Trump weren't tweeting all this crazy stuff all the time, then maybe he would be a 48% or 51% because of the economy, although he's polarizing in many respects, right? But, like, I mean,
stop stalling and just tell us who's going to win the midterm, Silver.
Just get used to that between now and November, because that's going to be every question.
It's just June. I don't have to answer the question.
So a couple other things. Our last episode of Priors was about partisanship, and I'm curious, Claire, if you see, we talked about how this hyperpartisan moment is really making every issue split deeply along partisan lines. Is the economy playing out in that same way? Is it just another on this list of hyperpartisan issues?
I think everything can be viewed through a lens of partisanship. So I think Perry's earlier point of the quote unquote good things that I use that phrase a lot on this podcast right now. I think a lot of the good things that voters will see in Trump can be boiled down to North Korea talks if they don't blow up in his face. Mm-hmm. I guess that's pun intended. But also the economy. And so they might turn into what the appointment of Gorsuch was in the last election, i.e. a greater reason that you can kind of hold your nose and vote for Trump based upon. You know, that these are principles I believe in, a better economy, a warmer environment for business, whatever it might be. And you can say, okay, yes, Trump and the Republican Congress are doing what I want them to be doing. And so even though I don't like little things that they're doing, I'm going to vote for them anyway.
But yes, views of the economy are becoming partisan. I think that there's some evidence. There's a lot of polls that show Republicans' view of the economy improved by April 2017 before Trump's policies had really started. It was more that the unemployment rate was low, and now a Republican and not that Obama guy was in charge of the economy. I think and I assume if Obama was running this economy, Democrats would think it was better than they do now. I mean, I do think the one challenge of this is that for a while even when Obama was president, you had Bernie Sanders and other Democrats criticizing the economy versus you don't have a lot of Republicans right now saying Trump's economy is bad. In fact, they're almost all saying it's good. So there's a little bit of a difference between the two parties there. But I think in general, views on the economy are becoming partisan, and I don't think they were in the late 90s. I think most people broadly agreed the economy was good in the Clinton era.
I think there's like some famous political science literature showing that like even in the Clinton era, a lot of Republicans did not believe that
let me look for that.
The deficit had gone down and so forth. I mean, it is an interesting point where like Democrats have a big debate whether a good economy means more equality or more growth.
Right.
Republicans are like, what the hell are you talking about? It means growth, baby. And so therefore, when you have a growing economy, then Republicans are a little bit less squeamish, I guess, about like, for example, cheering the rise of the stock market or housing prices or whatever else, whereas Democrats might be, it's good for folks up top, but like, what's it doing for the middle class? And so that might make Democratic messaging a little asymmetric with Republican messaging on the economy.
But is that an effective Democratic message to say, sure, there's growth, but look at wages, look at the income disparity? Is that?
Wages are okay too. It takes often years to gain good data on income disparities. And so I frankly don't know offhand like this string of very good jobs numbers. I mean, I would assume that I don't know, but also the stock market's way up, so maybe it wouldn't actually lessen inequality.
A lot of what Democrats were trying to argue, particularly around the tax bill, is sort of a hard thing to make, which is this is going to hurt you in the long term, right? You might not feel it now, or you might know that the stock market is actually doing well, but these policies are going to hurt you 5-10 years down the line, which I actually think is a little bit of a harder argument to make because people are human and they say, yeah, but I want that big tax break next year or whatever it might be. So I think it's also just a little bit of a harder argument to make right now.
And to build on that, a lot of the Democratic pollsters and strategists are saying our mistake in 2016 was focusing too much on Trump. We have to focus on the economy and pocketbook. But right now in 2018, it's really hard to make a campaign about the pocketbook issues. And it's really easy to run a campaign about Trump is weird and does weird stuff. And so I think there's a core tension here in the Democratic message. If you listen to Bernie Sanders, he's always like, but the media is covering Russia too much. Russia is the issue that could actually help the Democrat, or the whole idea that Trump is under scandal is what's going to help the Democrats in the midterms, not the economy.
But to the long-term problem the Democrats have forget 2018, 2020, you do need to have, I continue to think, a non-Trump message.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I wonder actually why the Democrats aren't putting more of a spotlight on some of the rollbacks to Dodd-Frank that are being enacted. Those seem like core issues that really actually do kind of call back emotionally for voters to the 2008 financial crisis. We literally had Hollywood movies made about the abuses of big banks, and yet it is a pretty undercovered story that some of these regulations are being softened. So I do continue to think, why aren't there more messages from Democrats about that? I do think it has to do with the fact that we're in a midterm cycle, and as I said before, it's a dumb cycle. But going forward, I think some of those things about the economy and regulations kind of make sense for Democrats to talk about.
I think it comes back to what you said earlier, though, that the message of the Democrats has often become Trump is racist, has become like a unifying message in a way that I think can be. I understand why they're running on that. It's easy to organize indivisible groups that way.
But you're going to need to pivot soon because 2020
that's my guess.
Yeah, because 2020's campaign starts after November, 6th?
But it is also possible to square the sort of hard anti-Trump message with particularly the issue you just mentioned. I mean, there is a sort of anti-crony capitalist message that both points out that Trump is acting in these abnormal ways and is saying that, he's rolling back financial regulations.
But here's my point, is that that's still a fundamentally, in my opinion, a primary message, a message for a Democratic base. Whereas I think in some ways what Democrats sort of would want is a happy warrior against crony capitalism, right? Screw mentions of Trump. Just get someone whose message isn't kind of fundamentally all negative all the time about Trump and more about kind of the happy dappy, we're here to fight for you and fight against these evil corporations. Forget the political names. We're here to fight against the anonymous guys who are screwing you over.
Who you drafted to see who your notion of this successful person.
I don't even remember.
I don't remember the drafts.
I would say to listeners, actually, don't take any of my drafts seriously.
Fair enough. Good. Yes, I think that's the right approach. So let me ask one other question. Perry and Nate, you can jump in on this too. But on policy specifically, the tariff issue. Do those specific policy issues matter, or is it really just about whether it then has this larger effect on the economy as, seen broadly?
I'll be curious what Nate says, because I don't know. A lot of the Republican senators have criticized the tariffs and said they would hurt the economy. I'll be curious if voters in the Midwest, I think Ben Sass in Nebraska has been saying this can help hurt our farming industry. I'll be curious if Nebraska Republicans are going to move. I mean, it's not a really good example, but I don't know that. I wonder if Trump, sort of Republican base voters are following tariff policy or not. I don't have a good sense of that. I think the overall economy is a good thing for the Republicans. I'm not sure it's going to win in the midterms.
Nate?
Yeah, to me, it's do issues matter? Sure. It's what, yeah. Which issues though? Tariffs to me is an issue that's a little bit
wonky or something.
Esoteric. Yeah.
Nate, you started by sort of hinting at you felt like the pundit class doesn't talk about the role of the economy very well, and I don't want to miss an opportunity for you to say some things about how pundits talk about our politics. So you want to come back to that and end on that note?
No, look, I think pundits tend to overrate the role of campaign strategy, right, and personality, and some stupid events that the media cares about that regular voters don't care about. I do feel though this is something where maybe the conventional wisdom is fairly well calibrated. Certainly in 2012, it became a thing that the economy mattered, and so every first Friday of the month you had a jobs report come out, and the jobs report was treated like it was major campaign news. There was less of that in 2016, I guess, although you had a non-incumbent race that year. But I'm not sure that the conventional wisdom is necessarily way off. I do think that if Republicans keep the House, which again, based on betting markets, based on what we think right now is almost a 50-50 chance, maybe not quite, but almost 50-50, then it's not that hard to explain it. And one reason why is that we do have, what's the unemployment rate? 3.9 or what,
3.8, something like that, yeah.
Let me look that up, yeah. But we do have a really good economy that gives warrant to Trump's claims that hey, I'm the jobs president, right? And whatever, it may be unconventional, but the economy is doing really well under me. I understand business, etc. There's growth. Yeah, it is 3.9%. That is one of his most powerful arguments. And between the fact that the economy is good and the fact that Republican districting and gerrymandering, as talked about at the top of the show, gives them a big advantage. That's really not that hard to see why Republicans are almost 50-50 to retain the House.
All right, let's leave it there. That concludes our second installment of Priors. Who knows what the next installment will bring? If you have any suggestions, let us know. Okay, Nate Silver, thank you, as always.
Thank you.
Claire Malone, thank you.
Thanks, Jody.
Perry Bacon Jr., thanks for coming up. Thanks for joining us, as always.
Thanks for having me.
My name is Jody Evergan. Thanks to Galen Druk, our producer, who, of course, was also on the show earlier. Keep an eye out for his piece in reaction to today's Supreme Court news. Tony Chow is in the control room, keeping us updated on World Cup scores. You can get in touch by emailing us podcasts at 538.com. You can also, of course, tweet at us with any questions or comments about the show. If you're a fan of the show, leave a rating or a review in Apple Podcasts. It really does help others discover the show, because when you leave a rating, our rankings go up, which means we're just kind of a little more visible. So do chime in there or just tell someone about the show. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon.